Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're plunging right back into the sources today, looking for those deep insights, those sometimes challenging truths that, well, you need to stay informed.
And today, it's a big one. We're tackling Plato's Critias, a truly mythic journey, unfinished but packed with philosophical weight.
Absolutely. We're not just looking at ancient history here, though there's plenty of that.
Yeah.
We're really analyzing the arguments, the structure, the whole philosophical blueprint Plato lays out through this story of a war, 9,000 years ago?
That's the claim, and it picks up right where the Timaeus dialogue left off. Timaeus finishes his cosmology, his description of the universe, and then he offers this really striking prayer.
Right. He asks that his words stick around if they're true, but if he got something wrong, he asks for correction to be set right.
Exactly. And that spirit, that openness to correction is so important because Critias, who speaks next, he isn't just offering philosophy. He claims he's giving us history, ancient but accurate history.
Okay, so that's our mission for this deep dive. We need to break down Critias' arguments. How does he justify this story? And then really dissect these two states he presents, ancient Athens and Atlantis.
And track the logic. Why does one rise morally and the other, well, spectacularly fall? According to Critias, anyway. We're hunting for that Platonic warning buried in the narrative.
It starts almost immediately, doesn't it? Critias gets the floor, and his first move isn't just polite thanks. It's a demand.
It really is. He asks Socrates for special consideration, for forbearance from the audience. It's this fascinating bit of meta-commentary right at the start.
Okay, let's unpack that. He asks for equal or greater forbearance. Why? He argues his task, describing human history, is fundamentally harder than Timaeus' task of describing the gods and the cosmos. Why would that be?
Well, Critias lays out this core argument about representation. It all hinges on what the audience already knows, or rather what they don't know.
So his point is, it's easier to talk about the gods to humans than it is to talk about humans to humans.
Precisely. Because when the subject is divine or cosmic, the audience's own inexperience and utter ignorance, as he puts it, actually helps the speaker.
We don't have a yardstick to measure it against.
Exactly. He uses this great analogy of looking at paintings. If you see a painting of the heavens or distant mountains, something you don't know intimately, you're satisfied with an indistinct and deceptive representation. You accept it because frankly, what's the alternative? You don't know the real thing precisely.
The standard for belief is just lower when it's something remote or abstract.
Yeah.
But that changes completely when you start talking about us, about people.
It flips entirely, yes. As soon as the topic shifts to mortal things, human actions, human government, even the human body, we all think we're experts. We have this familiar knowledge from daily life.
And that makes us tough critics.
Severe judges, he calls us. We're immediately looking for flaws in the imitation. Is that really how people behave? Is that state really plausible? If the speaker doesn't perfectly match our own, often flawed understanding of human nature, we jump on it. We call it untrue.
So Critias is about to describe this ancient Athens, 9,000 years ago, as a pinnacle of virtue. But he knows his audience will instinctively compare it to their own messy, imperfect reality. That's a huge rhetorical hurdle.
It really is. He's trying to present a philosophical ideal, but frame it as history, which means it has to survive the scrutiny of everyday human experience. That's tough.
It raises that deeper question, doesn't it? Why does familiarity make us more critical? Is it just because we can be, or is it something about the nature of truth when it comes to human affairs? Maybe it has to feel real in a way cosmic descriptions don't.
Well, that's the implication, I think. For human stuff, our standard seems grounded in verisimilitude. Does it seem true based on what we know? Critias is essentially asking for a temporary suspension of that standard. Give me some leeway, he's saying, because depicting an ideal that was real is harder than just making things up.
It certainly makes telling an ideal history more challenging than presenting an abstract cosmology. He needs some kind of shield for his story's claim to truth.
Right. And Socrates grants him the indulgence, by the way, and even extends it to Hermocrates, who's supposed to speak next. But Socrates also gives Critias a little nudge, reminding him the last speaker, Timaeus, was wonderfully successful. A bit of pressure.
So how does Critias respond?
He accepts the challenge, but then he does something crucial. He invokes Mnemosyne memory, the goddess of memory, mother of the muses. He explicitly says his success depends on remembering Solon's account, which came from the Egyptian priests.
So memory isn't just a poetic flourish here. It's his philosophical justification.
Exactly. It's the mechanism. It's how he claims to bridge that 9,000-year gap and overcome skepticism. He's arguing this isn't just any ideal state, like the one maybe discussed in the Republic. This is the historical ideal preserved through memory.
Okay, so the stage is set. How does he begin describing this ancient Athens?
He frames it within this epic conflict. A huge war 9,000 years back between people inside the Pillars of Heracles and those outside. And Athens, this ancient Athens, was the leader of those inside, the champion.
In its foundation, how did it come about?
Divine order. Croesus says the gods divided the earth fairly, no arguments, each knowing what suited them. And Athens. That land went to Hephaestus and Athene.
Brother and sister. And notably, they shared a love for
philosophy and art. The text explicitly links them through that shared interest. These two, representing wisdom and craft, obtained the land, planted worthy citizens, and established the government.
And their style of rule is important too, right? Very different from later ideas.
Very different. They govern like skilled pilots, he says, using persuasion, the rudder of persuasion, to guide souls. Not physical force. It's all about moral and intellectual leadership from the start.
Which sets up a clear contrast with what we'll hear about Atlantis later. But first, why was this history lost? Croesus spent some time on this.
Yes, and it's a really insightful point about civilization itself. He says names survived: Cecrops, Theseus, the famous founders. But the actual deeds, the substance of their lives and government, that vanished.
Why? What happened to the records, the stories?
Destructions, floods, cataclysms. Critias argues that the survivors were usually isolated mountain dwellers. Their focus, pure survival. Getting food, basic shelter. They had no time, no leisure for anything else.
And his point is that history, philosophy, looking into the past, that only happens when basic needs are met.
Precisely. Inquiry into antiquity, he says, arises only when cities achieve stability and provide leisure. It's a product of having the breathing room, essentially. Before that, you're just trying to make it to tomorrow.
That really reframes things.
Yeah.
So the Athenians of Cretias' time, because they have that leisure, can now reconnect with this lost memory, a memory preserved somehow, despite the immediate post-cataclysm ancestors losing it.
Exactly. And then he gets into the structure of that ancient state, and this is where, well, you just can't ignore the parallels with Plato's Republic. He describes a distinct warrior class. Guardians.
Set apart, living communally.
Yes, living separately from other citizens, holding all property in common, taking only necessary food from the community they protected. It's almost a direct echo of the guardian class.
The ideal political structure from the Republic, but presented here as actual history.
Right. They avoided the corruption of private wealth, lived this disciplined, shared life focused on defense and virtue. He even explicitly says they practiced the pursuits of the imaginary guardians from the earlier discussion. So the philosophical ideal is now grounded, supposedly, in historical fact.
And it wasn't just for men either.
No, absolutely not. Critias makes a point of saying military pursuits were common to both men and women. He points to the image of the goddess Athene, fully armed, as the symbol of this. Virtue and capability mattered, not gender.
And the state itself, was it huge? An empire?
No, quite the opposite. It was deliberately limited. He mentions a fixed number, about 20,000 men and women, dedicated to warfare. A controlled, self-aware population size. Their territory was also clearly defined, mainly by the isthmus. Restrained, focused.
But then there's this really striking description of the land itself. It wasn't always the Attica they knew.
No, he insists the original land was incredibly fertile, the best in the world, capable of supporting a vast army easily. But then came the destruction, 9,000 years of repeated deluges.
And the land washed away.
Large parts of it, yes. He says the earth fell away all around and sunk out of sight. The current land, the Attica of Plato's time, is just the bones of the wasted body.
Wow, what a metaphor. The rich soil, gone.
Lost to the sea. Leaving this harder, barer landscape that doesn't hold water the same way. He contrasts it vividly with how it used to be mountains covered in deep soil, lush forests feeding springs and rivers. He even mentions evidence like old timber roofs from trees that no longer grew there.
It's like the land itself mirrors the loss of the rich historical tradition. Only the skeleton remains.
That's a great way to put it. And he zeroes in on the Acropolis itself. Originally, it was much larger, flat on top, with this incredibly abundant spring. A single night of excessive rain, combined with earthquakes, he specifies this was the third major disaster before the famous flood of Deucalion stripped the soil away, exposed the rock, choked the great spring, leaving only the small trickles they see now.
So this ancient Athens, the ideal state, existed in this incredibly fertile land, but the Athens Critias knows is virtuous, but impoverished,
Yeah.
surviving on the remnants.
Exactly. And the warrior class reflected that simplicity even in their prime. They lived around the temples of Athene and Hephaestus in modest houses, no gold, no silver. They deliberately avoided both meanness and ostentation, just simple, focused virtue.
Which sets the stage perfectly for their adversary. The contrast couldn't be clearer.
Right. But before diving into Atlantis proper, Critias pauses for a quick note, a sort of translator's note.
Ah, yes, about the names.
He reminds everyone that Solon, when he got this story from the Egyptian priests, translated the original, presumably Egyptian or some other ancient language names, into Greek. That's why you're hearing Greek names like Atlas for these, well, foreign figures, just setting the record straight on that.
Good point.
Yeah.
Okay, so Atlantis itself, how did it begin?
Also divine allotment. This time, the island of Atlantis fell to Poseidon, god of the sea.
And he had children there.
Yes, with a mortal woman named Cleito. She lived on a central mountain. And notice that right away the foundation involves a mixing of divine and mortal.
Foreshadowing, perhaps.
You could definitely read it that way. It's central to the whole philosophical problem later. Poseidon then did something quite extraordinary. He reshaped the land around Cleito's dwelling.
The rings.
The concentric rings, exactly. Alternate zones of sea and land, 2 land rings, 3 water rings encircling the central island where Cleito lived. He literally broke the ground to create this, making it inaccessible in the early days before ships.
Like a natural fortress, designed by a god, and he provided for them.
Completely. 2 springs, 1 hot, 1 cold, abundant food naturally available. It was a self-contained paradise.
And from Poseidon and Cleito came the rulers.
10 princes, 5 sets of twin boys. The eldest, Atlas, became the first king. And it's his name that was given to the island Atlantis and the Atlantic Ocean.
And his twin.
Eumelus, or Gadarus in the local language apparently, ruled the part of the island nearest the Pillars of Heracles, towards modern Cadiz perhaps. These 10 lines of kings ruled for many, many generations.
And they became powerful.
Immensely powerful, accumulated incredible wealth. Their empire didn't just cover the island, it extended across the sea, holding sway, Critias says, as far as Egypt and Tyrrhenia, which is part of Italy, a true superpower of the ancient world.
What fueled this? What resources did they have?
This is where it gets really specific. They mined metals, both solid ones you dig up and fusible ones you melt, including orichalcum.
The legendary metal. What does Critias say about it?
He says it was mined in many parts of the island, and back then it was the most precious substance known, except for gold. But then he adds this crucial detail. By his own time, orichalcum was only a name.
Suggesting the resource ran out, or the knowledge of how to use it was lost.
Exactly. It represents this unique, almost magical source of their wealth and power, something that defined their golden age, but was ultimately ephemeral. It wasn't sustainable, perhaps. Philosophically, it's fascinating. Their ultimate treasure is literally just a memory by Plato's time.
Unlike the enduring, if simple, virtue Athens represented. What else did they have?
Everything, basically. Timber in abundance, enough food to maintain all kinds of animals, wild and tame. And he specifically mentions a huge number of elephants.
Elephants. Why elephants?
Critias notes they were the largest and most voracious of animals. So the fact that Atlantis could support so many signifies the island's sheer capacity, its overwhelming abundance. They also had every kind of fragrant plant, root, herb, wood you could imagine, cultivated fruits, wild fruits.
Even dessert.
Yes. He mentions the fruits which furnish pleasant desserts and are used for relief after dinner when we are full and weary of eating. So complete luxury, total ease, no struggle for necessities.
Which means they had perpetual leisure, perpetual abundance, unlike the Athenians who had to struggle after the cataclysms. So the big question is, what did the Atlanteans do with all this wealth and time? They built, monumentally. Critias describes the kings constantly adding to the central royal palace, each trying to outdo the last.
Yes, making it a marvel to behold for size and for beauty. And right there, you see a potential shift, don't you? From functional excellence, perhaps, towards, well, just showing off. Competitive grandeur.
It definitely hints at hubris. And their engineering was on another level.
Breathtaking. They built bridges over the sea zones to connect the outer rings to the central palace. And the canals. Just incredible. They dug a massive canal 300 feet wide, 100 feet deep, and 50 stadia long. That's nearly 6 miles, connecting the outermost sea ring directly to the ocean.
Creating a harbor inside the rings.
A harbor capable of holding the largest ships. They literally reshape their world to control the sea and bring commerce right to their doorstep. It's technological mastery on an immense scale.
And the measurements he gives, they seem almost obsessive.
They really do. The central island, 5 stadia across. The rings, the largest water and land zones, 3 stadia wide. The next 2 zones, 2 stadia wide. The innermost water zone, 1 stadium wide. Everything precisely measured, planned, controlled.
What about materials? What did they build with?
They quarried stone from underneath the central island and the land rings white, black, and red stone. They used this to build the docks, which were hollowed out, creating double harbors, and also for the buildings themselves.
Using the different colors.
Yes. He says they used the different colored stones in combination to give pleasure and satisfaction to the eye. So, aesthetics were clearly paramount, but the most striking feature was the walls.
The metal coatings.
Incredible. The outermost wall, the one around the largest land ring, they coated entirely with brass, like bronze. The next wall inward, around the second land ring, was coated with tin.
Bright and reflective. And the innermost wall, the one around the citadel itself.
That one flashed with the red light of orichalcum, their most precious, unique metal reserved for the final, most central wall.
It's a hierarchy of metals, isn't it? Strength, then brightness, then this unique, fiery value right at the core. It's wealth literally built into their defenses.
And that extravagance reaches its peak in the temples, especially the main temple dedicated to Poseidon in Cleito.
How big was that?
Huge, a stadium long, half a stadium wide, 300 feet high, he implies. The text is a bit tricky there. But the decoration.
Go on.
The outside was covered entirely in silver, except for the pinnacles, which were gold. Inside, the roof was ivory, intricately worked with gold, silver, and orichalcum. The walls, the pillars, the floors, all coated in orichalcum.
The whole interior shimmering red.
Imagine it! And in the center, the main statue. Poseidon himself in gold, standing in a chariot pulled by 6 winged horses. So tall, his head touched the ivory and gold ceiling.
And surrounded by more gold.
100 nereids, sea nymphs, riding on dolphins, all crafted in gold, surrounding him. It's an overwhelming statement of wealth and power, far beyond simple religious devotion.
A stark contrast to the modest houses and lack of gold and silver in Athens.
Night and day. The Atlanteans used precious metals like everyday materials, and their infrastructure supported this luxury lifestyle. Those hot and cold springs fed public and private baths, elaborate gardens, groves dedicated to Poseidon, gymnasia for men and horses. Even a massive race course, a stadium wide, running around the whole outer land ring.
It sounds incredibly busy, incredibly developed.
He describes the area outside the main citadel as densely packed with houses. The canals in the main harbor were constantly full of vessels and merchants from all over the world. He mentions the din and clatter that went on day and night. It's a picture of a bustling, noisy, commercial powerhouse.
Utterly different from the quiet, self-contained virtue of the Athenian model. What about their military? Did it match this scale?
Absolutely. It was just as organized, just as massive. The entire plain surrounding the central city was divided into lots. 60,000 of them, he says, each a square of 10 stadia by 10 stadia.
60,000 districts, and each had to provide soldiers.
A very specific quota. Each lot had to supply 1/6 of a war chariot's equipment and crew, 2 horses and riders, a pair of heavy infantry soldiers, 2 archers, 2 slingers, 3 stone shooters, 3 javelin men, and 4 sailors to man the fleet.
Do the math on that. That's enormous.
It totals 10,000 war chariots, a huge cavalry and infantry force, and enough sailors for 1,200 ships. It's a military machine built on staggering logistical planning and designed for overwhelming force.
So you have this incredibly powerful, wealthy, organized state. How was it governed? You mentioned the 10 kings.
Yes, the descendants of Poseidon's 10 sons. Each king had absolute control over the people and most of the laws within his own division. They could punish and even put people to death as they saw fit.
That sounds dangerous. Prone to tyranny.
It could be, yes, but there was a check. Their relationships with each other and their ultimate authority were regulated by specific commands left by Poseidon himself.
Where were these commands recorded?
Engraved on a pillar. But not just any pillar, a pillar made of orichalcum standing in the very center of the island within the temple of Poseidon.
Again, their most precious material is elevated to sacred legal status. How did they ensure the kings followed these laws?
Through this incredible ritual they performed periodically. Every 5th year, then every 6th year, Alternating Critias notes, this gives equal honor to the odd and the even number, maybe hinting at some deeper mathematical or cosmic harmony they sought.
Okay, what did this ritual involve? It sounds important.
It's absolutely key to understanding their original moral framework. The 10 kings would gather alone in the temple precinct where sacred bulls roamed free.
And they had to hunt them.
Yes, but crucially, without using iron weapons, only with wooden staves and nooses. They had to capture one of these bulls through skill and coordination, not brute force technology. It's symbolic, right? Controlling raw power with restraint.
Master the beast within, perhaps, before ruling others.
That seems to be the idea. Once captured, they led the bull to the orichalcum pillar, and the sacrifice itself was designed to reinforce the law. They cut the bull's throat over the top of the pillar so the blood ran down directly onto the sacred inscriptions, the laws, and the mighty curses promised for any king who disobeyed them.
Wow. Binding themselves to the law with blood, literally.
Exactly. Then they mixed the bull's blood with wine in a great bowl. They'd pour a libation for the god, then purify the pillar with the remaining mixture. After that, they'd draw wine from the bowl using golden cups.
Golden cups, naturally.
Of course. And pouring a libation over the fire, they would swear a solemn oath. They swore to judge according to the laws on the pillar, to punish any transgressors, and never to command anything or obey any ruler acting against their ancestral laws. They bound themselves to the rule of law, Poseidon's law, above any individual king's will.
What happened after the oath?
They'd have supper. But then, as night fell, the ritual continued with a focus on judgment and humility. They put off their magnificent day robes and dress in simple, beautiful azure blue robes.
Blue. Interesting choice.
Perhaps symbolizing the night sky or clarity. They sat on the ground, in the darkness, around the embers of the sacrifice they had just made. And in that state, they judged any legal cases or accusations brought against one another.
So opulence and power by day, but judgment required humility, darkness sitting on the earth.
That's the striking contrast. It's like the ritual forced them to strip away the trappings of power to engage in true judgment. At dawn, they wrote down their sentences on a golden tablet and dedicated it in the temple, along with their azure robes. It was a very sophisticated system trying to keep immense power in check.
Did it list specific laws they had to follow?
It mentioned the most important ones. Critically, they were forbidden from taking up arms against each other. They had to come to each other's aid if any one of the royal houses was threatened. They had to deliberate in common on matters of war and policy, generally giving leadership precedence to the line of Atlas.
And perhaps most importantly,
A crucial check on the king's ultimate power. No king had the authority to put to death any of his royal kinsmen without the consent of the majority of the other 9 kings. A safeguard against familial tyranny and internal power struggles.
so structurally it wasn't inherently flawed. The laws anticipated the dangers.
Exactly. The structure itself, the legal framework, was quite sophisticated. It acknowledged the temptations of power, which means if Atlantis fell, it wasn't because the system was badly designed from the start. It was because the people within the system failed. It was a moral failure, not a structural one.
And this really is the philosophical heart of it, isn't it? The why. Critias says for many generations, this system actually worked.
It did, as long as, and this is the key phrase, the divine portion within them remained strong, as long as they were obedient to the laws and genuinely connected to their divine ancestry through Poseidon.
They possessed true and great spirits, he says, gentleness combined with wisdom.
And here's the absolute core of Platonic ethics coming through. Critias states they despised everything but virtue. Think about that. All their gold, their orichalcum, their power, they held it lightly. They saw wealth and property as a potential burden if not managed correctly.
That's true Socrates, isn't it?
Yeah.
Self-control, temperance, knowing the limits.
Textbook Socrates. They understood, Critias argues, that genuine goods, virtue, wisdom, friendship, these things actually increase when you practice self-control and moderation towards external wealth. And conversely, these true goods are lost if you develop too great regard and respect for possessions. Wealth only works if you master it, not the other way around.
Their greatest strength was their ability to handle their immense fortune without being corrupted by it.
For a time. But the seed of the problem was there from the beginning, that mixing of the divine Poseidon and the mortal Plato. Critias pinpoints the moment of decline very precisely.
When does it happen?
It begins, he says, when the divine portion began to fade away and became diluted too often and too much with the mortal admixture. Basically, over generations, the human element, the mortal side, got the upper hand.
And consequences.
Immediate and devastating. They became unable to bear their fortune. They lost that crucial self-control. They started to behave unseemly. The internal moral compass was broken.
And this internal decay started to manifest outwardly.
Yes. The love of virtue was replaced by the love of wealth and power. That external glitter, the gold and orichalcum that was once just decoration or a sacred symbol, now became the goal, the measure of success. Their incredible wealth and technology without the check of temperance just sped up their moral collapse. They became defined by avarice and unrighteous power.
And Critias makes this really sharp point about perception, about who could actually see what was happening.
Yes, that's crucial. To someone who had an eye to see, meaning someone with philosophical insight, the Atlanteans were becoming visibly debased, losing their fairest gifts. But
to everyone else,
to those who had no eye to see the true happiness, they looked better than ever. Glorious, blessed, powerful, successful. They were at the peak of their outward magnificence precisely when they were rotting from within.
that is a chilling critique of confusing appearance with reality. A society can look amazing on the surface while being fundamentally broken.
It's Plato's warning echoing down the ages, isn't it? That external success is meaningless, even dangerous, if the internal moral core is corrupt. Atlantis became this spectacular, hollow shell.
And this state of affairs couldn't last. It attracted divine attention.
Indeed. Zeus himself, the king of the gods who rules by law, perceived that this once honorable race was now in a woeful plight. He saw the depth of their corruption.
And decided to intervene.
Yes. But Critias is very specific about Zeus's motive. It wasn't just pure destruction or anger. Zeus decided to inflict punishment so that they might be chastened and improve.
Chastened and improve, not just wiped out.
That's the crucial phrase. It implies the goal was correction. A harsh correction, undoubtedly involving catastrophe, but aimed at potentially restoring balance, at forcing them to learn, rather than simple annihilation. It was an attempt to shock them out of their avarice and unrighteousness.
To end their intoxication with power and wealth. So Zeus gathers the other gods.
He gathers them all into his own dwelling place, the very center of the universe, from where he observes all of creation. And he began to speak.
That's where it ends.
That's where the dialogue breaks off. Unfinished. We get the whole setup, the diagnosis of the moral disease, the divine intention to act, but not the speech itself, nor the description of the final cataclysm that presumably followed.
Leaving us with this incredibly stark contrast.
Perfectly drawn. You have Athens. Simple, virtuous, communal, defined by self-restraint, surviving on the bones of its former glory. And then Atlantis. Magnificent, technologically supreme, globally powerful, drowning in wealth, but ultimately destroyed by its inability to control its own mortal admixture, its own greed. The lesson seems unavoidable.
So, wrapping up this deep dive into the Critias, it really is so much more than just a cool story about a lost city. It feels like Plato's detailed blueprint for understanding political health and decay.
It really does. Athens embodies that ideal of stability through shared virtue and, crucially, limitations. Atlantis is the cautionary tale about what happens when abundance and power aren't anchored by strong internal moral self-control.
The core lesson seems to be that preserving that divine portion, that moral integrity, that commitment to virtue over wealth, is the only real defense a society has.
That's what the source material hammers home. External factors, the gold, the orichalcum, the giant army, the amazing tech, they aren't signs of strength in themselves. Plato frames them as a moral test, a burden even.
Right. The moment temperance, sophrosyne, is lost, that very wealth becomes the fuel for the society's downfall. It accelerates the corruption.
The Atlanteans failed the test. They couldn't bear their fortune responsibly. Their power became the mechanism for their self-destruction.
Which brings us back to that final chilling note about Zeus's intention. He intervened, the text says, to chasten and improve.
Not just to destroy, to correct.
Yeah. So, if we take that idea seriously, that maybe the ultimate consequence for this kind of societal intoxication with wealth and power isn't just oblivion, but some form of harsh correction meant to force improvement. Well, that leaves us with a pretty provocative question for today, doesn't it?
It certainly does. If we look around at our own complex, often materially obsessed world and wonder if maybe our divine portion, our collective moral core, is feeling a bit diluted.
Then what kind of societal chastening, short of outright disaster, might be needed to force us as a civilization to remember the importance of self-control, of valuing virtue above mere avarice and power?
What does improvement look like when a society has become unable to bear its own fortune?
A profound thought to leave you with. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Plato's warning from the ancient past. We'll see you next time.